Our next guest is Anouk Wipprecht, and I think she's already online. Hi, Anouk.
Hey there.
Hi. I hope to pronounce well your name. Anouk is a Dutch-based high-tech fashion designer and innovator. She works in the emerging field of fashion tech, combining fashion design with engineering, science, interaction, user experience design. They told me that you have a presentation, you have some slides or something like that, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you should have it there.
Okay, so I let you do your presentation. I'm here for you if you need me. I'll be here for your speech. Maybe we can meet at the end and discuss or whatever you want. I'm here for you. Okay?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
The stage is yours.
Yeah, so I am from the Netherlands. That's where I got born. I studied fashion design, after which I got really interested in robotics and engineering. So I started to play around with technology. When I started fashion design, I was 14 years old. I got really interested that fashion is, you can really express yourself. You can really communicate something of yourself. But a few years into my study, I discovered that the garments that I was creating were analog. They were not digital. They were not sensoric. They were not doing anything. So I got really fascinated by the field of robotics, because for me, the robots were the brain and the heartbeat that I wanted my garments to have. So I started to combine that. So that's what I have been doing for the last 20 years. So it's mainly combining microcontrollers and sensors with design, and it's design around the body. So if the next slide can be started. You can find me on like social media, Anouk Wipprecht. If you have any questions yourself, you want to maybe get into working with microcontrollers or sensors and all of that stuff, it's really fun. Reach out to me and maybe I can help you on the way and send you some links where to get cool electronics and all of that stuff. Next slide, please. So I work with the spaces around the body. So you can think of the intimate space, the personal space, the social space, and the public space. And these are all spaces that we all have around us. And I think those are really fascinating because these spaces all differ. So maybe culture to culture, person to person, but also it really depends on mood. You know, if you are more grumpy at a certain day, you might want to have less people in your personal space. So the study of proxemics and proximity is called proxemics theory from Edward T. Hall. He defined in the 60s, he defined that different people have different spaces that they like to have people in, or that's just the way they interact in their daily lives with the spaces around them almost, you know. He was measuring these spaces using a stick, so a very analog way of measuring things. So in the half of 2000, what I did was I took his research and I put that into my sensor. So I'm using digital sensors in order to measure these spaces. Next slide, please. So this is the sort of the proxemics theory from Edward T. Hall, and all these measurements I can take using sensors. And how that can look like is the next slide. For example, my robotic spider dress that you can see behind me, it has underneath the head, it has these big black balls sort of, and they have the sensors in there. So I'm using ultrasonic rangefinders, and they measure up to 8 feet, so around 8 meters in front of the design. And then when somebody steps into the personal space, and I'm sorry, I can unfortunately not share videos in this presentation, but I can you can look up spider dress and you can find it connected to my name. If you go to the next slide, this system of basically servo motors is mounting out. So whenever a presence is detected and somebody's stepping in and entering into any of these spaces, the system is reacting and it's literally attacking. So I programmed, if it would only be attacking, it would be super boring almost, you know. So my focus is interaction design. And what I did is I programmed 12 states of behavior. So depending on how you walk into this space in front of the design, it's effect attraction that the dress has. So when you walk up very fast, very close by, the dress is reacting much more rapidly than when you walk up to it in a more elegant speed and a more elegant distance. So that becomes really interesting if you're traveling around with a dress like this that is detecting, the spaces around the body. Because what I mentioned before, every culture is different, you know. So when I present this dress in America, where I am at the moment, I'm living in Miami and I'm working from here. If I present it in America, people are pretty elegant. They stand around it in a certain distance, you know, not really wanting to go too close almost, you know. So the dress is reacting to that. The dress is more elegant. It's like, moving and all of that stuff. But when I present this dress in my home country of the Netherlands, people are much more in your face, sort of, you know. So they come much faster, much more close by. And that's also making the reaction and the interaction of this dress much more aggressively. So that's kind of really interesting, not only designing these things, but when they're finished, they really start to come alive, you know, and especially when you're, traveling around to different cultures and presenting it there, that's just really interesting to see. It's almost doing live research on location. So if you go to the next slide, this is one of my first 3D printed dresses. I collaborated with Italian architect Niccolò Casas 10 years ago. And it was for a show of Volkswagen. So there were 8 designs and they were all interactive. So they were all doing something. So one of the designs is the smoke dress. So if you go to the next slide. The smoke dress is based on another animal. It's based on the octopus. When it is almost afraid, it pushes out ink so it can escape. So that's the notion of the interaction of the smoke dress. So if you go to the next slide. The dress is based on sensors as well, and other than the spider dress, it senses the amount of people in a direct environment around the dress. And the more people are in the direct environment of the dress, the more smoke it gives up. So the more smoke appears in the surroundings of the dress. Also my robotic cocktail dress, which I created for Cirque du Soleil, is a dress that is more a social design. So there's a push of the button and it creates this little drink, in this case gin and tonic. Currently we have a version that can mix multiple drinks together, but we haven't released it yet because we were about to release it with Cirque du Soleil, and then COVID hit and we had to stop our practices sort of. But if you go to the next slide. The dress is based with a back piece. In the back piece is a peristaltic pump, and this pump is making basically the fluid pump up. So when the button is being pushed, the motor starts and the pump starts to pump and pumps it to the frontal part. If you go to the next slide. So this is one of the dresses in the restaurant. The restaurant is called Heart Ibiza. So it's a collaboration between Cirque du Soleil and the Adria brothers, which are cool chefs. And Cirque du Soleil in 2015, they started to combine food with experience and music and technology. So I got invited to create a few projects there in Ibiza. So the cocktail dress was one of them. Next slide, please. So within my work, I'm researching if and when we put technology on the body, what does it do other than like blinking and bleeping, sort of, you know? How can it become more social and playful, like the drinkbot dress? How can it become more, for example, behavioral and defensive, like the spider dress? And how can it become more expressive and sensitive, like the case study of the smoke dress? So basically, I'm creating different case studies, and then by creating the interactions, I can test them out and demo them out. And through that, I am doing research through, in this case, a lot of things that are happening in the surroundings. I also do a lot of research to the body itself, connecting the body to different parts of electronics, which I will tell a little bit about later. Next slide, please. So for me, it's really seeing fashion as an interface, so a sensoric interface, a sensitive interface, a digital interface, and a technological interface. What I always say is that we are used to technology sort of technology came into our lives to help us. But at this point of time, if I open my smartphone, I almost get a heart attack of almost this piece of device wanting to tell me a lot of things and want to tell me my agenda and all of that stuff, you know. So my smartphone at this point of time is not necessarily very sensitive to my needs. It's not measuring my stress levels and see how stressed I am at the moment, you know. And I think that's really my interest in body-based technologies, that they are able to sense you, that they are able to go into a certain dialogue with you or have a certain communication with you. And by that, they can measure things like stress levels and all of that stuff. So that is really my interest in the notion that technology can become much more sensitive to our needs in many ways. If you go to the next slide. And one more. So I do a lot of collaborations, a lot of brand collaborations. I work a lot with fellow artists, fellow engineers, and all of that stuff. I worked with a broad amount of companies, from Intel to Google to car companies to Swarovski, jewelry brands, and all of that stuff. This was a collaboration that I did with Audi. In which they had a new car that came out and they asked me to create dresses based on that. So I took that very literally because I took the parking sensors, the sort of the proximity sensors out of the car and the headlights as well. And I put that into these dresses, sort of, you know. And for me, it's all about, when I work with a company, looking at where my identity as a designer and an artist would merge with the DNA of that company that I need to work with. In the case of Audi, it was, I think, a very successful collaboration because the style was very much like, and the interaction and sort of the brand campaign that they had in mind. So that became a really interesting project. Next slide. You can find more of this. These movies will not work. This is a little bit about the process behind that. Next slide, please. The other thing that I do is working with a friend of mine, bionic pop artist Victoria Modesta. She's a really great advocate for the disability community, in where Victoria lost her leg at a young age. And if you go to the next slide, I can show you some pictures. Victoria lost her leg at a young age, and instead of hiding her leg, she really was out to showing it and make the field of people that are differently abled to discuss that. You know, why should you hide your leg and be almost ashamed of it when you have a prosthetic leg? How can you really show it and put it in people's faces, sort of, you know? So me and Victoria, I met Victoria 6 years ago, and we have been doing some collaborations together. We created a spike that lighted up for one of her shows in Paris, and also the smoke leg that you can see here on the right side. It's a leg that's based on the smoke dress. The idea was you step into on the leg and it starts to smoke. This was in 2015. And if you go to the next slide. This was a project that I did with her, in where she became almost an instrument. It were like 3D printed instruments behind her, and also she has this tusk design. In her prosthetic leg, I built an accelerometer, so the idea was she moves her leg and she can make music with it. So she did multiple performances during Art Basel in 2016 with this. And the next slide. This was our latest collaboration that was for Rolls-Royce. And if you go, I think, to the next slide, you can see a little bit more of it. But it's a little Tesla coil that we built into her leg. And basically energy, a Tesla coil is like in this case, normally they're really big and like 500,000 volts, but it generates energy. And we release the energy basically in the void space of her leg. So you can see electricity going through her leg. And this is what we recorded for a new car that came out from Rolls-Royce. And she was making a fashion movie for that. If you go to the next slide. The other thing, what I already mentioned before, is working with body signals, which is, of course, really important if you work in the field of fashion tech. And the next slide will show this. So I work with EEG, brain signals, muscle contraction, EMG, EDA, galvanic skin response, lung volume, so the way we breathe, we use our lungs, place in space, movements, like I did in the leg of Victoria using an accelerometer. the heart rate and the heart volume, temperature, oxygen. So there's a multitude of things that you can measure from the body, which is interesting, right? And all these sensors and all measurements need to be taken from, of course, different parts of the body, like brain signals from the head area, EMG, you might want to have a strap here, the heart rate, a lung volume. So everything wants to almost be measured on a certain place on the body. So it makes it really good for like really garments and fashion pieces to have sensors embedded, so they can really measure the body in the right place on the body instead of only from, for example, from the wrist. You know, working with body signals is just really interesting because you can create really a direct input-output situation, in where the input might be the brain signals and the output might be something that starts to light up, for example. You know. Next slide. So one of the projects that I did with brain signals was Agent Unicorn. And if you go to the next slide. I did that for Ars Electronica, and other than creating a dress for like size 36 for a model, I wanted to create a device that was a little bit more modular almost, you know. I created it for children with ADHD, and it became the name Agent Unicorn. So if you go to the next slide. The unicorn horn that's mounted on the head has a little camera. Next slide, please. And what I wanted to do is measure, kids, their brain. If you have ADHD, like everything and anything around you has an effect on you. And when you have ADHD, it's a little bit more prone to disrupt your daily life almost. So I wanted to create a device that was head mounted, that was doing EEG readings, and that would help children navigate and learn about their brain states and about their brain signals, and that anything and everything around them has an effect on them. So the next slide. What you already saw is the 1020 system of medical EEG. So it's 64 electrodes on the head. For a child in a white room with a doctor, that's not super comfortable. So what I wanted to do was close out all those brain sensors up to 8 electrodes. So if you go to the next slide. And then mounting those sensors back into the design. So closing out 64 electrodes so you don't have a full head full with electronics, proving out that you could measure certain waves and brain waves that have to do with focus-related activity in the brain, which did work out. So we could create a system based on 8 electrodes. And if you go to the next one. And here you can see the placement of those electrodes in the headset, basically. Next slide, please. So if you're prototyping, it looks pretty rough. Like sometimes you have like wires hanging out. You're just trying to figure out how things would fit. You're sometimes testing things with like another system that's on top of it. It sometimes doesn't look really nice. And then you start to build it in, which you can see on the next slide. So this is the finished piece with the controller in there for EEG readings, with the camera and a camera controller board and all the electrodes in the headset. So that kind of worked out, closing down those 64 electrodes to 8 electrodes. I'm using the P300 wave, the P3 wave of event-related potential in EEG. And because it was so successful, me and a company in Linz in Austria, GTech, they created a system based on this. So it's called the Unicorn BI, which you can see on the next slide. And it's available for makers and creators to work with, like what I call reliable medical like EEG data. You have a lot of EEG systems that are out there that might be like $200 or something. Often they measure from the frontal area. For me, that is a little bit more EMG, so muscle contraction, what I measured before, or it has to do with the way we use our eyebrows. So for me, measuring from the back of the head is much more reliable because you are looking at a certain wave. And again, what I mentioned before, you want to be as close to the signal as possible, you know. So on the next slide. You can find the device on unicornbi.com. And for people that are interested in all of this, there are also hackathons online, which you can see on the next slide. So the hackathon is called brain.io. I cannot show you the little movie of it, but you can find it on the website. It's inspired by Agent Unicorn, so by the headset. And yeah, it teaches people that are enthusiastic about EEG into all of this stuff. So it's free workshops and free hackathons. So once there have been some of them that have been digital because of COVID, but soon they will also be starting at most countries in the US and in EU in Europe. So keep checking this site if you're interested in participating. And yeah, maybe you can join one of these hackathons and learn more about EEG, because it's really fun to work with body signals. And the next slide. That was the end of my presentation. And again, yeah, my name is Anouk Wipprecht. If you have any questions about how to get started with electronics or something like that, or need some advice, try to reach out to me, and I might be able to drop you some links or help you on the way, because yeah, playing around with electronics and technology is much fun. And thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Anouk. I would like to ask you a lot of questions, but we don't have so much time, so I'm gonna follow your advice and ask all the questions on Instagram. And the only thing I would say is that I would really like to see the spider dress in Italian streets. Would be
I know, right? Yeah.
It would be very
Once
interesting.
Once I come over, I will take it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a very interesting work, and yeah, hope to see you here maybe next year live. And thank you again. Have a good day.
Yeah, for sure. Bye-bye.
Bye.